Our discussion today is on why we fear aging rather than embracing it. Our guest today is Brenda Deneen, a registered clinical counselor with over 30 years' experience in both the public and private sectors, working with both individuals and couples. She has a deep understanding and great insights into the process of aging. She helps people overcome their fears of getting older and helps them to create a vision for their life, including having good health, creating social connections, and living with a purpose. You are absolutely right. And this all falls in line with much of the research in like gerontology research, aging research, that we are living longer. Like science has brought us to this point where we're all living longer. You're an example, like you're saying, the baby boomer generation, you brought that up. Baby boomer generation is all living longer, essentially. They're quite resilient, and they are to some degree healthier than past generations.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's interesting because do you think then that, especially with the baby boomer generation, and now that if we are accepting this, that we know that we're all going to live longer, because when we have like medical science that's helping us live longer, we tend to be healthier overall, as like, and we're talking like developed nations. How do you see maybe this baby boomer generation, because they're kind of the first generation and a very big generation, that might help to change the perspective of aging?
Beautiful question. I love that question. So I was born after the war, and I was always aware that I was part of this baby boom. I don't know, like it was just, I grew up in the East End of Toronto, and the classes, like kindergarten, grade 1, I look at the photos, like there was huge classes. There were all these kids that were born, and it was huge. And it was like that. But it wasn't just that there were a lot of kids, and a lot of families had 4 children, or maybe 3, 4, 5 kids was common back then. And the women stayed home and were housewives back in the 50s. But there was this whole mindset. And I've always identified as a baby boomer. And then throughout the decades, what have we been? We've been a very strong generation with a mindset of we can do things. We can make things change. We can change the world. We're leaders, we're confident, and we're forward thinking. And so we're carrying those mindsets. We did this back in the 60s in the anti-war movement and the women's movement and so on, and carrying on in different things over the decades. And now as we're getting older, 70s, and we'll be going into the 80s and 90s, we're still going to have those mindsets. We've taken care of our health. We've got resources. We have support systems, and we think we can do it. So, so this generation, I would say, is the first generation to have these mindsets and attitudes, you know, as a whole generation compared to, you know, say my mother's generation. And yeah, so you know, there's a lot of strength there in the baby boomers. I'm not sure how the younger people look at us. Unfortunately, sometimes there's a bit of a dichotomy, or what do they say now? Okay, boomer. I'm not sure what that means. There's kind of a little meme there in the culture. But I do hope, like, I like to learn from the younger people too. I want to learn from the millennials, because they're a very different generation and the generation younger than them. I hope there'll be a mutuality. What can we learn from each other? You know, what can we learn from each other?
You know, maybe that actually is part of it, is that what you're saying is like, you know, when we're talking, this generation has influenced a lot in our current and existing culture and our lifestyle, in sort of our views, our attitudes. And this generation too has been very much into like learning. And so maybe that also is part of that where you just mentioned, like, you know, I want to learn from the younger generation too. So it is like a mutual kind of learning. It's not just maybe a way of like millennials or the younger generation always having to look up. It's going both ways now. So we're all learning from each other. And that would actually definitely change the perspective, because it's like a mutual level of respect versus pitting against each other, right? Like one generation versus the other. Like, I know more because I'm older and wiser. You might know more about technology, but it doesn't really matter, or whatever it might be. So rather than being one, like, against each other, where maybe it's going to be more of an amalgamation, and working together and learning from each other. That's a great hope anyway. That's a great vision for us to kind of to end on. Hopefully that's what we can do. I can tell you, based on studying gerontology, there's definitely a younger audience that's very much interested in aging and learning more about aging. And these students are not the baby boomers, right? Like, these are the younger, they're just graduating or finishing high school, and they're starting university, and they're taking these courses and programs, and they're far more interested in gerontology and the process of aging than I think ever. And so you're definitely seeing it too, because there is a shift that's happening where a lot of, like, universities now are actually having a program that's related to aging. So you can kind of see that shift within, I guess, the world now, because universities are doing it, which means it's reflective from what the demand is, right?
That is that is really an important point. And you think each generation has a lot to offer, huge amounts. And yes, the millennials are different, but they've got a lot to offer. And the generation, I'm not sure of all the name, Gen Z or whatever they're called now, the next one. We all, something to be interesting would be to have some kind of a panel or a dialogue between, say, boomers and millennials, or younger. And what are some of the things that we're wondering about? And what would we like to ask each other? So we enhance that feeling of mutual communication and respect and sharing together.
I do believe they definitely have that. Being part of Simon Fraser University, there's lots of sort of panel discussions, because they like to look at the variations of generations. So yes, I'm sure we could probably find something somewhere, or maybe that's something I will plan for as a panel discussion, and I'll keep you posted. Well, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me, with regards to, addressing this fear of aging that sometimes we end up having, and kind of changing that perspective, less fearful, and maybe thinking about it from a more positive outlook, and knowing that we can live a long, healthy, happy life. And there are great examples out there of people like yourself, and people like, even, as you mentioned, your relatives, my grandparents. Like, there's examples of like living a longer, healthier, happy life, and relatively independent. So yeah, I think these beliefs that we tend to have, just sometimes we need to figure out what it is really that's triggering it, and then hopefully we can, get support, maybe take in some counseling, and then move past it, so that we can keep ourselves feeling very vibrant and as youthful as our ages.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think conversations like this, what you're doing, are really, really valuable, because you're bringing out into the surface, out into the open, issues that people are thinking about. So I want to thank you for hosting this, because I think that people who are watching are going to receive some value from this.
Thank you, Brenda. Do you have any final thoughts for everyone?
Yeah, I just want to say, find ways to overcome any kind of fears, or like pinpoint or name some of your fears or anxieties, and find ways to bring that out into the open and to get support, so that there's ways to overcome those, and to develop a positive vision. And so a counselor can help you with that. Other people can help you with that. What is the vision of my life? And now that, say, looking at even the next decade, like if you're 40, 70 is like, whoa, that's a long way away. But, you know, just sort of planning for your future. And yeah, I think there's lots of possibilities. Yeah, so I want to yeah, to say to each person to ask what is possible in my life. Yes.
I love that. Thank you so much, Brenda.